Hello, it's January 17th, 2017. I'm Tony Smario, coming to you from BroSal.org YouTube channel and BroSal.org on the internet. We've got a Twitter account, and we're just going to start putting these commentaries on Instagram as well. We're fighting in a world here where any sort of insight is being met with more and more resistance from a system that's been in control, in perpetual increasing control since the inception of their media system, this mass communication system. And so there's already many things on YouTube. An interesting thing I never told everybody was a few weeks ago, Dad noticed that Mr. Doom, that site that we subscribe to that makes a 20-minute collection every day of the news clippings from various sources that represent this end times scenario. He used one of Dad's covers, one of my father's graphics, for his cover, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago maybe. And it's a graphic that Dad made, so it was the only one place to get it, and that was to copy it off of our cover. And that was a show that only got 117 views, I think. 117 views. Mr. Doom's got, I think, 100,000, 50 or 100,000 subscribers. It's weird to think, was he one of those 100 views? Or is he part of this system of, counterintelligence, especially for the Christians, end times, end times, end times? I just did the last commentary on the fact that the end is not yet. And so all this talk about end times, end times, end times just shows either ignorance of the scripture or purposeful misdirection or some combination. And so today I want to talk about this fake news hysteria. To think that that's a reaction would be, I believe, a terrible mistake. So I want to take us back for a moment in history and just think about how the modern world of what we call propaganda got started. And recall that in 2013, America officially made propaganda legal. It's no longer illegal for the government to propagandize its citizens and allies. It used to be illegal because it was common practice in the war that because it was a war, you need to be able to say, you need to be able to use the written or spoken word as a weapon, like a gun. And so if you can say things that help your cause, even if they're not true, if that saves lives, right? So propaganda is born in the ideological sense of using it as a weapon against your enemies. Telling them, for instance, we've got troops surrounding you, like a bluff in poker. Even though you don't. Maybe you fly a few planes by, but they're blaring sounds of, each plane sounds like 10 planes. And you're putting in the paper that you're flying 100 planes instead of 10. I mean, that's propaganda. So when the idea of using the papers to state things that aren't true came out, as this idea of using it as a weapon, of course, a law had to be passed to say, well, but you can't, we the people of the country, the citizens in America, we need to know the difference. You can't propagandize us. You can't tell us stuff that isn't true, because that's illegal in journalism. And so in 2013, it now is legal to propagandize. They repealed that law, and there's no longer a law against propagandizing the American people and their allies. So that's the first piece of the puzzle to recall in this fake news story that's coming at us now, like a sudden drama. As if the news we've been getting for 100 years hasn't been fake. And here's the example I want you to consider. Edward Bernays is the guy who's credited with inventing what we call propaganda. And what the word propaganda relates to is the concept of using psychological insight rather than physical abstraction, right? What Freud helped, this Bernays was a nephew, I think, of Freud, and it was studying his uncle's work in which he realized, these crazy people you're pointing out that are moved by basically fear and sex can be moved to do things through their psychological preoccupations that they can't be moved to do through any sort of abstract logical argument. In other words, you can point out to a person the rational argument, let's say of jumping in the freezing river to save somebody, and that will have a certain effect on you to explain the nature of the current, the temperature of the water, the time it will take, the odds of success, right? All these kind of things. But if you tell somebody that's your dog, that's your mother, that'll make you a hero, you'll be rich. These emotional stimulations will move a person to do things that no rational argument would allow them to do. This was the insight that Edward Bernays then applied, as we know famously, to corporate America to get people to buy crap they didn't want or need or that wasn't even good for them. You couldn't argue it. Hey, this is a poison that goes in your mouth that you shouldn't swallow. They use it to, it's a corrosive. It's a byproduct of the chemical industry, and we need something to do with it, so we're dumping it in your water. But it won't really hurt you. Just don't swallow it. It's good for your teeth, right? Fluoride. You can't tell them that story. You just tell them it fights cavities, right? Fights cavities, gives you healthier, stronger teeth. 4 out of 5 dentists recommend it, right? Your emotional side. And so what Edward Bernays did, the real telling thing that kicked it all off was that at the time, which is just about 100 years ago, I think it was the late teens or early 20s, cigarettes were becoming very popular with men, but were very unpopular with women, like cigars. Women, it was seen kind of how it is finally 100 years later now in most Western cultures, as something sort of dirty. It's a dirty habit. It's a dirty, stinky, smelly, makes your teeth smelly and ugly. And, women who had been previously molded and manipulated to, wear high heels and strap themselves into corsets and all sorts of things to be impressive looking to men. Well, cigarette smoking didn't promise a very impressive looking woman. But the cigarette companies went to Edward Bernays and said, man, that's half a market right there. How do we get that market? And Bernays says, well, you can't just point out to them anything logical about it. All the logic's against you. Makes your teeth dirty. It's a primarily men's habit. You don't look pretty. Doesn't make you pretty. So Edward Bernays said, yeah, but it makes you independent and free. And so he organized a few high-profile ladies, models, I think, and perhaps stage actresses in those days, to be seen in a popular place in New York City, I believe it was, smoking cigarettes to make this PR piece where he had hired them to be there doing this dirty habit. If you imagine how risque it would be. Get some very high profile, popular stars to come out and do something very seemingly uncouth. And so at the same time, he lets the news people know that these big time stars are going to be staging a protest and smoking cigarettes. So you got all the reporters there. And in the newspapers, it says they call that what Bernays told them the protest was about the independence of why shouldn't women be allowed to do what men can do. This is a thing about being your own woman and making your own choice. And these aren't cigarettes for the women. They're liberty sticks. Go ahead, ladies. Light up a liberty stick. Show those men that you're just as independent of them as they are of you. So, of course, the results are history. Smoking became the most popular cultural habit in the world. And so it was all done not by arguing any sort of facts, but by pushing the pre-understood psychology of a person in the direction you wanted them to go. And they learned that in doing so, they could get otherwise intelligent, well-informed people that could be given the facts, the rational explanation at the same time. Hey, girls, those are the same cigarettes you didn't want to smoke because it makes you look ugly and stinky and your teeth brown and they're not good for you. They're not pretty. Now, we didn't have, say, the health information at that point. So you maybe couldn't argue they give you cancer, but you could certainly argue that they make you stinky, they make your clothes stinky, they make your breath stinky, they make your hands stinky. There's nothing pretty about them. But no, they became known as liberty sticks. And so even though the same argument stood about them being stinky and ugly, now they made you independent, and so you're willing to be stinky and ugly if it makes you independent. Because that became the propagandized vision. And if you think that anything's changed in 100 years with what they succeeded in learning and doing 100 years ago to get women to smoke, that's how they get a Christian nation to go to war. That's how they get a peace process that's based on the fact that we keep building more and more and more weaponry. The tanks aren't good enough. They got to be more sophisticated. The planes got to be more sophisticated. The aircraft carriers, we got to have more sophisticated ones that can do more. Why? Who else is building aircraft carriers? Why are we allowing that? I thought the UN, after World War II, was there specifically to prohibit that. I thought the end of the Cold War was the promise that we didn't have this world to look forward to a proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. How did it turn out that the biggest industry in the world now is weapons of mass destruction? So if you don't see that as Edward Bernays' propaganda machine still in action, still pushing emotional buttons to get us to do things that we wouldn't do even while you present the facts to our rational brain. So this is how I think you get sort of this North Korea, right? They just keep talking about, the way I see their headlines come across, North Korea's weapon system's even worse than we thought. He might be capable of launching an intercontinental ballistic missile armed with a nuclear warhead at any target he wants. Yeah. Russia's been able to do that, for 60 years, and now apparently they're aggressive enough. We're saying they're prepared to do it. Putin even said not so long ago, "Don't mess with nuclear Russia." But North Korea's in the headlines. We're worried about North Korea, really. Iran, the Iran deal. This is so bad. What's Iran? We've had our hands in Iran since the early 50s. We've been manipulating that country. I mean, I know a woman who's Persian, and from their standpoint, all the mullahs are in the hands of the Western money. The mullahs are the ones that okay the Ayatollah's directives, which are what run the government. So that's essentially to say the Iranian government has its strings pulled by the same money people that Russia and China do. That's why they're conveniently being set up on the other side of this left-right paradigm, coincidentally enabling this Third World War to come off exactly as William Guy Carr predicted in his book, or reports that he'd seen as a prediction, right? People that want to shoot that down as being some Office of Naval Intelligence, counter intel, that's fine. I can accept all that. There's no proof up until William Guy Carr's book. But son of a gun, if it was just counter intel pro, or if it was just a fiction, if it was just a red herring, it's a little odd now the way the world's set up, isn't it? And the way the hysteria of the religious against the non-religious, especially in America, the hysteria of the radical Islam threatening now the poor little innocent state, the victim, Israel. Right? How is that even possible? That the world of rational thought does not override this propagandized world of emotional string pulling? That you've got this country claiming to be Christian, hating on everyone, even their own fellow Americans, everyone. If you're a sinner, if you're a homosexual, if you go to the wrong church, if you belong to the wrong religion, if you're, the very opposite of what they were told to do. And then you got them ready to kill all the Muslims, the only other people in the world that acknowledge Jesus as anything at all. But they don't acknowledge him as God, so they're our enemy. Well, so everybody's their enemy except the Zionist Jews, who for sure don't acknowledge Jesus. They want to build a temple and wait for a different Messiah than Jesus. So that's who the Christians are behind. That's God's people. Even though the scripture points out quite clearly that God divorced them 800 years before Christ. Told them, you're not my people. You'll be known as not my people. Right? Jesus told them this temple will be destroyed, not one stone upon another. So, and he'll raise it up in 3 days. Jesus is the new temple, right, for Christians. So why are they behind these Jews that want to build another temple and wait for a Messiah, right? What's behind it? Propaganda. That's why, right now, as I said in the last show, the end is not yet, because they're going to say peace and safety. And right now they're not saying peace and safety. They're preparing you for peace and safety through the propaganda. And that's why all this fake news is coming about right now. It is there. Even Europe, I see the EU has got a commission on determining where Russian propaganda is coming from through the news. And it only takes a quick glance to look at the fact that anything that is critical of this, obviously manipulated government. I mean, even the mainstream media has been expressing that the lobbyists, the Wall Street-owned government, I mean, the left wing has been pointing that out for decades now, that Wall Street owns the government. That's nothing new. But anyone who's questioning this Wall Street-owned government is suddenly Russian propaganda. I mean, it's so obvious. It's too obvious, you guys. Come on, think about it. All this hoax terror, these truck attacks that can be clearly seen to be hoaxes, Orlando shooting, Sandy Hook, Boston bombing, all hoaxes, guys. Hoaxes, stage drills. You got this big thing now, the crisis acting and stage drills. When was that ever important in all this world I've grown up in? When was that what was going on so much? Now that's going on. And while that's becoming the mainstream thing, fake news. They're not pointing out all these hoaxes as being fake news. No, the fake news is anybody trying to poke a hole in the hoaxes. So things like Pizzagate, for instance, one of the most intelligent things I've run across in the wasted hours of research on the internet is one of these researchers pointed out that Pizzagate's too obvious. I mean, this guy's running a pedophile ring, and that's why he's full of all these obvious postings on his Twitter account. Even his Twitter icon, his avatar, is, what was it, one of the Roman emperor's, young boy sex objects, right? And all these postings that he's putting, wouldn't that attract attention to you if you really were a pedophile ring? Why would you attract attention to yourself? Why would it be those emails that are leaked through the WikiLeaks, which is also clearly controlled opposition, or they wouldn't get so much media? Be easy to turn WikiLeaks off. Nobody reports on what they leak. Just like they turn the real researchers like John Judge and such people off. You never hear about these guys' research. But they showed you what the truth was behind the Kennedy killings, behind the Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and the whole Jonestown massacre that they blamed on being all these mass suicides that turn out to be anything but mass suicides. I mean, there's plenty of research there to look at, but does any of our journalism acknowledge these researchers? Never. But WikiLeaks, ooh, yeah, they're like anonymous, right? These people get headlines because they're meant to be the acknowledged sources, so that they can be, we can be controlled through knowing exactly. Just like, look at George Orwell's 1984. It turns out in the end that the handbook for the rebels that's been leading them all along into their supposed revolution was written by the state. So, and remember, Orwell was one of these, I think, Office of Naval Intelligence, or one of these insiders at the very time that propaganda was the mainstream thing that you did with this knowledge that Freud came up with if you were in the military strategy and strategizing about power and how to keep it in the world, how to use all your tools. Well, the newest one was psychology, and the Nazis had been working on it, and that's why you brought them over to be part of your new CIA, because they'd been experimenting and gaining in this knowledge. How do we control people using their own mind and the access we have to that mind? And so propaganda became the popular tool, and that's why TV became the popular item. And that's why in the poorest countries, almost everybody's got access to a TV. You go to a village in the middle of nowhere, somebody's got a TV, and they've all got access to it. It's like cell phones now. They cost $1,000, and every child's got one. Because that's the one tool they're going to make sure you have. You don't have a car if you're poor. You don't even have a house. You don't have your own room. I mean, you have to share a room. You have to rent space. You have to ride the bus. You have to eat food that's not even food. But you got a cell phone. You're on the internet, baby, for free. If that's what there's all sorts of programs to keep you hooked in to their propaganda machine. So Pizzagate seems almost too obvious, as if they set it up, this Pizzagate story, because pedophilia is a big enough thing, and it is true, and it is happening, and those probably are real pedophile codes, and all that stuff probably is super incriminating, even though it can be fake or not. It just doesn't make sense that they would be so obvious about it. But it does make sense that they'd use this obviousness, just like the rest of their hoaxes, to create a big hysteria. Problem, reaction, solution. Problem. People are going to get hurt over volatile issues like this that can't be confirmed. Reaction, right? The public doesn't know what's true and what's not true. And that becomes a very big debate in their mainstream forum, in every forum. Solution. Well, somebody's got to be able to help guide what's true and what's not true. And all these forums now that pledge to do that, all I can say is, wow, wait, whose information are you using? You know, the official story? So Kennedy was shot by Oswald? Is that true now? I mean, any other story is unconfirmed and therefore fake, right? In other words, whose information is the guiding principle as to whether a story, you know, if we're going to agree that the government's been, you know, run by Wall Street and infiltrated by lobbyists and that they're at least suspect, you know, they've been caught many times. I mean, let's face it, they've been brought up on charges, many congressmen and such. So it's not unheard of that they may be abusing their power. So if it's possible, how are we going to know which stories are accurately calling them on it and which aren't? And who are we going to trust to tell us that? You know, so the whole thing is a propagandized way of doing the unthinkable. Taking away any possibility of real journalism under the idea of providing a more secure journalism, right? They're going to save us from fake news by giving us the most propaganda, by making anything but propaganda illegal. If it doesn't pass through a certain propaganda net, you can't even see it anymore. So I think that's the world that's coming as part of this, the time is not yet. The things that they're doing, they want to hide. And insights like mine about what's coming with the 7-year covenant and the rebuilding of the temple and the white caliphate that's going to rise, these are all things that are not going to be easy to find, I don't think, in the future. So I hope people are downloading this onto their computers, and I don't know, someday you might even be a criminal if you have any of this on your computer. We'll see. But I believe that that's the insight into what's trending right now with the fake news. The legal propaganda of just a few years ago paved the way for nobody to get in trouble, really saying anything and everything. And I think that's what they have been doing. And I'm feeling more and more that all this, you know, the Illuminati people that are pointing out all the Illuminati stuff in entertainment and all this, that's all, come on, you guys, it's all just a big show. Everything's propaganda now. Everything's a show, because the whole idea is to get to a point where they can now point to the show and go, wait a minute, none of that's true. That's hurting people. That's not true. Wait a minute, you're making it impossible. They're going to be able to point to the fact that it's now impossible to know what's true. And therefore, in an interest of reviving some sort of journalistic integrity, they're going to be able to wipe any kind of truth out with an algorithm, with a system. Anything that even breaches certain subjects or talks about, you know, anything anti-Semitic, any of those things now will certainly become increasingly harder to post, and then they'll be flagged more increasingly, and then there'll be more regulations to limit what and how and where these things can be said. You know, that sort of stuff. It won't be like the Gestapo coming to your house. It'll just be that it gets more and more unpopular, more and more difficult, just like cigarette smoking became. You know, at the time that Edward Bernays brought those gals out into New York, what they were doing looked to anyone else, if there weren't cameras and it wasn't those girls, it would have looked like your good, wholesome daughters getting on the corner and dressing like hookers, which has also become popular now. That's what it would have looked like to those people. Like, oh, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? No, it's a protest. We're protesting our independence. And next thing you know, for a generation, a couple of generations, women smoked as their right. in the face of the facts. And I say we live that way right now. We're so propagandized that we live this great lie, feeling so proud to live it in the face of the facts. So that even if Pizzagate isn't happening in the way they're showing us, it isn't really happening with these characters at Ping Pong Pizza, it undermines the idea that pedophilia is in fact going on, probably with many of these characters. Certainly Bill Clinton is highly suspect for the people, this Epstein that he hangs out with. In the past, in the very recent past, if you're a president or a high profile anything, and you're told by, your Secret Service or anyone, hey, do you know that guy you're hanging out with there, your pal? I know he's your buddy, but did you know he was convicted as a sex offender? Maybe you shouldn't be flying on his private jet to his private island. That might not be good for your reputation. I mean, that's pretty common stuff. People have been killed and roughed up to keep such images out of the public eye before, because you couldn't have your star. You couldn't have people knowing your star was a homosexual, or your star beat his wife, or your president, was really a pedophile. So the fact that they're using this Pizzagate thing, they're not using it to start an investigation, a true investigation into where does this pedophile stuff lead. They're using it as a prompt to stop any real investigations as fake news. And I think that's what you should really see in this fake news stuff, this propaganda, is that what they're going to do is use it to stop any real journalism into any subjects that are incendatory, which is, of course, everything that's important. War, refugees, religion, politics, right? Pedophilia, homosexuality, gender issues. All these things are incendatory, and so to stop any real journalism into those things now, anything can be drummed up. They can drum up the hurtful story. Oh, look, so-and-so was reported to be a pedophile and it hurt their business, and now we found out that was fake news. So now what does that do? Well, anybody that's trying to investigate pedophilia now is going to be suspect. And if you're setting up all these firewalls, well, you may not even get the benefit of their journalism in order to make your own decision. So that's not journalism, that's anti-journalism, right? That's censorship in the name of freedom of the press. So that's what this fake news really represents, not any kind of a discernment of news, but the procreation now of this propaganda that's reached a level and a stage in which journalism itself, censorship itself, will now be called journalism. And journalism will now be undermined completely by censorship. There will be no such thing as freedom of the press, even in the tiniest corner. Even what I'm doing now, already, as I said, YouTube took one of our playlists off. I can't imagine why, except that it was called End Times Trending. That's it. They didn't point to a specific video. It was a playlist, End Times Trending. So apparently that's against the rules already. The regulations have changed enough in the year and a half that we've been doing this, that's against the rules. So anyway, trying to give you some insight on how the world's really operating right now. Hope that you'll share us and register over at our website, and get on our social media and try and get the word out while we still can, because there isn't many outlets like ours that I'm able to find that are really cutting through the BS to something insightful and helpful. So I hope it is helpful. I know it is to a few of you, and I appreciate the comments and the support. And we'll just see where the Spirit leads this story, this commentary, and the people that are seeking to find the truth out there in the world. So good luck, everybody. We'll talk to you soon. Talk to you soon.